Mara Webster with Welcome to the Stage, and today I'm so pleased to welcome to the stage Ike Talbut to talk all about the Netflix series Lord of the Flies. I wanted to start by talking about the audition process for you because I've heard you say that you didn't read the book until about the third or fourth round of auditions. There were so many rounds of auditions for all of you.
Yeah.
And when you were sending in your first kind of self tape and going through those first couple of rounds, because you just had what was on the page, how did you go into figuring out who Simon was as a character before you necessarily had all the backstory that you learned later on?
Well, I think obviously Jack Thorne is a very talented writer, and there's lots to sort of draw from in the script and also in the book. But in the script, there's lots of sort of relationships that I can relate to, like like the friendship between Jack and Simon. You know, the relationship between Jack and Ralph, and Simon and Ralph, and Simon and Piggy. Like there's lots of sort of, you have to try and find similarities between your character and yourself, so that you can portray that character in with a sense of realism. And I think that was something that Mark was really trying to emphasize, was a sense of realism, because like not many of us had acted before, so it was less about performing and more about sort of finding people who are like the characters. Obviously, Lox isn't like Jack. Like he's confident. He's not evil. Same goes for Thomas. But like finding people who hold themselves the same way, who have similar traits, and the ensemble as well. Like loads of the moments that Mark managed to capture. Or should I say Marks managed to capture, because there were two Marks, the cinematographer and the director, were not in the script. They were just like, they just started recording when we were playing around on the beaches in the jungle, because we're 30 boys on an island. We do silly things, you know. We have fun and in these like crazy situations, and so they just captured stuff like that. And I think that was also something they were looking for in the auditions. And also in the first couple of weeks of rehearsals, we did 3 weeks of rehearsals in Malaysia, in KL, the capital, Kuala Lumpur. We did 3 weeks of rehearsals in which we were running through some scenes, but it was mostly just like talking about the characters and who they are and how they react to things and how they think and how they behave. And those conversations were really, like, you walk away from some of those rehearsals thinking, I understand who this person is a lot better now. And it's just about sort of meeting that character, because you're never going to be your character. Like, you're never 100% them, but it's about meeting them and learning who they are and how they are.
No, it's so brilliant. And, you were talking there about the acting workshops that you did with Tommy Lawrence. But I've also heard you mention a choreographer named Polly that you worked with, and she would have you do different exercises thinking about the energy in a conversation between characters and who's in control. What were the types of exercises that she did to make you play around with that sort of thing?
Well, one thing she did for all of us was, we all we were all like in the rehearsal studio, and we she made us come up with a dance, like a series of movements, because we were all like kids who had been living in England, who had just come to this really hot country. Um, and she told us to do a series of movements with a partner that represent any frustrations that you have at the moment. Like frustrations with the heat, frustrations with flies and mosquitoes and stuff. Anything, any sort of emotion that Malaysia is making you feel. Like, turn that into a dance, a movement, sort of primal sort of thing. And we all did it in pairs, and it was really cool though. Like, it was lots of sort of aggressive sort of heaving and scratching, and like and from those movements, Polly pieced together the dance that Jack's tribe do. So it was a dance that had been created from our own frustrations with the heat and the flies and stuff. And that's also a similar. When I sort of worship the dead pilot, I sort of, Mark told me to take elements from that dance, take like 3 moves from that dance, and push them to the extremes, and do it at like 10 times slower. And there was also another thing we did. We did an exercise where Polly told us to imagine a ball of energy between the 2 characters, and all of our emotions and all of our movements and interactions are going into this ball of energy between the characters, and one of the characters has control over the ball of energy. One of the characters has more control, more sort of dominance, and so as the ball of energy expands, one of the characters gets to lean forward slightly and push the ball of energy, and one of the characters has to lean back in order to sort of like avoid the ball of energy. And what that did, that was one of the things that really, you walk away from that and you think, oh, this is how these characters are. Like with me and Lox, we had this ball of energy, and it was like he would lean forward and I would lean back, but then there's the connection. So we make eye contact, and Simon is reaching out to Jack, and Simon and Jack doesn't expect this. He's not used to this. So Jack is on the back foot for once, and then he can't have that, so he gets back in power. And it's just like you find these moments within that can then be translated into the actual script. Like all the sort of, I mean, I had to do it because between when they cast me and when we shot it, I got taller. So I was taller than Locke, so I had to lean back a bit anyway in order to make him appear dominant. But we did have to sort of translate that movement, like the leaning forward or to like a press, or leaning backwards to like avoid, trying to run away if you're scared. And those sort of primal movements, like it all ended up in the final thing in one way or another.
And the relationship between Simon and Jack is so complicated. And you have those brilliant diary entries in voiceover that really talk about how, at boarding school, every time everybody else got picked up by their parents, it would be just the 2 of them. And that was the one time that he would get Jack's attention and Jack would laugh at his jokes. And then it's so heartbreaking to hear that even before the kids came back, he would start pulling away from him. And how was that really, really helpful to have that in the script, particularly looking at episode 3, to understand why Simon reviles Jack, but also still wants his approval?
Yeah, I mean, it's just masterful what Jack Thorne has written. Like the complexity of the relationship, the power dynamic, the way that whilst Jack is obviously sort of dominant, and Jack would consider Simon to be much weaker, Simon still has this sort of vantage point of getting at Jack, because Simon is the only one who really knows who Jack is, beyond the attempts to prove himself. And Simon knows why he attempts to prove himself. And the Simon's diary, the diary entries weren't in the scripts. They were added in post. That was a post idea. The diary does say stuff, but it doesn't say that stuff. I knew vaguely what the diary was meant to say, because we had spoken about it in rehearsals. I knew Simon's backstory. I knew that him and Jack were the ones whose parents didn't love them so much as the other boys did, and I knew about their relationship from my in-depth conversations with Mark and Jack and Lox, and but the stuff in the actual diary, I took it. I've got it in the other room, but the actual diary, it does say stuff father was talking about atomic bombs again, but it doesn't dive too deep into the relationship between Jack and Simon, which I think is something the voiceovers. That's a reason why the voiceovers were a very good idea, because then you get to see, while Simon usually doesn't speak much, he usually watches, he observes, put his he doesn't put his feelings forward as much as the others. With the voiceovers, you still get that in-depth look at what he's thinking, why he does what he does. And mine and Lox's relationship, I think, is very sort of evident on screen. Um, like I've said this in loads of interviews, but me and Lox met at the very first audition, like not even the first workshop one. He was coming out as I was going in, and we said like, "Oh, you're right. Good luck." And then at the next workshop audition, he was there as well, and like we exchanged contacts, and like we by the end of the auditions, we were really good mates. Like we were running lines with each other over calls, like we were really good mates. And I think again, it's like trying to find the truth within the story that Mark was trying to do, and that everyone was trying to capture that reality. And I think the fact that mine and Lox's relationship is like genuine in that we're so close, means that we can explore these places with a sort of safety net, because we know that we're best mates, and I know that he doesn't hate me. Not that Jack does hate Simon. I think there's a bit of resentment, but only because Simon knows that Jack doesn't hate him. But yeah, mine and Lox's relationship, I think, is really evident on screen, and I think the fact that we became such friends is part of the reason that we were both cast.
No, and both of you play so brilliantly alongside each other in the show. And as you were saying, Simon is someone who doesn't speak very much. And it's so heartbreaking to see when he's trying to bring up the fact that he thinks going over to Jack's camp is a trap for all of them, that Ralph and Nikki don't listen to him and they don't pay attention. And you see Simon just really withdraw, and that's why he goes off by himself to begin with. What was it like playing that scene and just finding how alone he feels in that particular moment, because he finally tried to use his voice and it still didn't get listened to?
That scene is, I think, one of a handful of scenes where we see how Simon, like, it's not all in his head. He actually is so alone compared to all of these other characters. Another one is where Ralph asks him and Piggy like why Jack is this way, and obviously Simon knows why Jack is this way, and he tries to answer, but he's like, but Ralph says no, no, I want to hear from Nikki. And you just see that the couple of times that Simon attempts to tell people what he's learned, it just goes badly. So you understand why he doesn't do it more often, why he doesn't use this information that he gathers by watching. That scene with the and the little ones, Jack, what of them? If we go and the beast comes down. I still remember my lines. That scene is actually so funny to me. I can't watch it without laughing, because it's not the bit where he makes fun of Simon. It's the bit where he says he like has to excuse the fact that he's just being mean to Simon. So he says, "What use has Simon ever been talking? Or Bill?" And TPT Tom, who plays Bill, he just looks so heartbroken in that moment, because he was like laughing along with Simon. Like on set we found that so funny. Like we've come up with whole, like Lord of the Flies 2 is titled Bill's Revenge. It took a lot of time to like not laugh at that. But yeah, those sorts of scenes are the ones where you really see how alone Simon truly is, and how it's not all in his head like it is for so many people. And he makes that attempt, and he doesn't do that a lot, but then it's just all the more tragic because nothing comes of it.
It is. You also have some great scenes with just a lot of physical movement. You know, when he goes to get his diary and you're just shuffling through the undergrowth and literally crawling on the mud. And, you know, then you've got kind of these ethereal, dreamlike sequences where it's really just about the movement of your body. And what was the preparation for scenes like that and putting all of the choreography of it together?
Well, the scene where I'm dancing to the dead pilot, that was those moves were the same moves that Jack does with his tribe, but like taken a couple of elements from them and then slow it down massively. My dad calls it the chicken dance because he was there on set and yeah he was laughing. But yeah, Mark just kept telling me to go further because I was thinking, you know, Simon's like a recluse character. He doesn't put forward these dramatic movements. He doesn't do it in his dialogue. He doesn't like do it in his movements. But then Mark talked to me about he says Simon's like alone. This is his chance to express all of these emotions, all of these desires, and he's going to do it through movement because he doesn't do it through dialogue. That's not who he is. And it's also one of the few scenes where you get to see Simon's sort of spirituality compared to the other boys. Like the other boys like make a big deal out of like patriotism and stuff. But Simon's sort of religion is something that grounds him in the series, I think. Like Mark made a big deal out of the fact that the area where the dead pilot is a church for Simon, and the pilot is Jesus, like strung up. And yeah, that dance, I was doing it subtly, and then Mark kept telling me to go further. So on like one of the later takes, I just like did it to ridiculous proportions, like just went all the way. Like you can't really see it in the actual show, but I almost like, you know that thing where you sort of bend backwards and then you land in a bridge. I almost did that, and then Mark just like said, "Yep, cut that. We're using that." And I was a bit in shock because I was not expecting him to use that sort of dramatic thing. But now I watch the actual show, like that was completely the right decision. I think the sort of the movement of that in comparison to how silent and sort of still and fragile Simon is in the rest of his scenes just sort of shows like how Simon he's not less than the other characters, he's just different from the other characters. Oh, and also you ask about the crawling scene where I'm like covered in mud. They had to, in order to attract flies, because they wanted me to have flies on that scene. That was one of the scenes. They did it when I was talking to the Lord of the Flies as well. They have this tub of fish guts that are like rotten. And what they do is they get a bit and they paint it onto whatever they want to have flies on it. And with the Lord of the Flies, like it was smelly, don't get me wrong, but it was fine because I was like a good few meters away. But when they wanted there to be flies on me, yeah, it was very, very smelly. But it was fun though, to be fair. Like I got to crawl through the mud, I got to cover myself in mud, and then like crawl. It was good. It was fun to film, especially since at the end of that day I was covered in mud, so they let me go in a river. And when I'm crawling into Jack's base on the beach, in the sand, I was having difficulty not laughing at that because all of Jack's tribe was supposed to be asleep, but there were like regulations about when we were allowed to film, so it was done in the daytime and they used day for night. So all of them were just like lying, pretending to be asleep. Some of them like snoring, like breathing as if they were asleep. And it's just like it's midday in Malaysia, so the sun is like beating it down, and they're just pretending to be asleep. Oh, funny times. But yeah, I think Simon's movement is a good way of sort of expressing the emotions that he doesn't get to say, like the other characters do.
No, I think you're so right. And lastly, I wanted to talk about your very final scenes at the end of episode 3 because I thought it was such a clever idea to imply the violence but not show the violence. And, even just that last moment where Simon's just laying in the water and it's just complete still, but you still see his arms just moving up and down with the waves. And so I wanted to ask about your experience in getting to film those final moments for Simon.
That was one of the few scenes where my parents were there, because they had specifically asked to see that scene, and like some of the producers or directors, someone said, why do you want to see your son die? That's so weird. But they said, no, it's not about that. It's so that when we actually see him die in the show, we know how it happened. We know that it's all fake. We've seen where the cameras are. Like, we know that there are 90 people, like, waiting for him to say cut. Like, and I think it was good to have them there because it's quite a heavy scene. Like, you would think it's one of the easier ones because you just have to do nothing. But acting dead is harder than you would think. Like, especially when you're in the water, because the tide was changing like constantly, so they kept having to move the whole, because they had a crane cam, and they kept having to move the whole track like further up the beach because the tide was getting further in and further in. And when we actually did my floating out to sea bit, I'm not particularly buoyant, so I kept sinking. So they got a floaty, like a little square floaty thing, and they put that down my shorts, and then they had like ropes going from the belt of my shorts under the water to scuba divers who were like out at sea, who would pull me out so that I would go out at the right pace that Mark wanted. And then when he said cut, it was like something out of a horror film, because I just like, I start treading water, and then like out of the sea, 8 different like divers rise up around me and start like pulling me back into shore. But yeah, that was a tricky scene to film because acting dead when you're floating, it's like difficult not to move, not to try to swim at all. Because you are trying to swim, you are trying to stay afloat, but at the same time, you have to act like you're not. It was tricky, and also emotionally, because that's the end of the character's journey, but it wasn't the end of my journey in Malaysia, because they did that like halfway through filming. Um, yeah, it was pretty interesting.
No, I love that because obviously that there's so many mechanisms to make sure that it's safe and that it looks good, but I had no idea that was how you film the scene. So thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you talking all about this and congratulations on the show.
Thank you so much. Can I say one more thing, please?
Yes, please.
I've not managed to fit it into any interviews. I voiced the Lord of the Flies. It's
Oh my
me.
God.
I voice it. It was like in this room. I whisper it. I whispered it into a microphone, and they sent that to Mark. That's what they used. It's me. Yeah. Sorry.
That's incredible. You are the Lord of the Flies. Well, congratulations. Thank you so much, Ike.
Thank you so much.